So hello everyone and welcome to Dorothy Heathcote Now 2024. So this is the fourth conference, and my model for these conferences has always been in 1996 there was a conference that Dorothy was leading in the organization. It was at what was University of Central England, and it was she called it an interactive research conference. The idea being that it's not one of those conferences where you go and you hear people talk and you sit back and you listen and you take notes and you take it all in, but that it's interactive. We're all exploring something together. We're doing research, practical research, perhaps more than academic research, but we are looking at something. So I've always, with these conferences, put something at the center of it, a question or something that we're looking at. And on this occasion, it is agency and empowerment. And what I mean by that is this was something that was critical for Dorothy, this idea of a shift in power, so that it's not simply about the teacher being the one who knows, the teacher who's got the information, the knowledge, and the children are the students. They are passive, they are receiving, they are taking in the knowledge. For her, this bred an attitude in young people, a student mindset, that they are there to be taught. And so they sit back and look at the teacher and say, okay, go on, teach me. And it's to make young people active in their own learning. And how do we make that shift happen? Because I think it is key, really, to Dorothy's work that she wanted to see that shift. Because she said, for teachers, it's a case of, well, if you can't take the power shift, get out of the kitchen, get out of the drama classroom, I suppose. So how do we make that happen? So today, we have a day of online sessions, and we're going to begin shortly with Iona Towler and Tim Taylor. And then at 11:30, we have Sukesh Arora and Isha Verma talking. They've been doing some research on agency in the classroom. At 12:30, we have Maggie Holston and Raja Farah talking about a project they've been doing, which is across different countries. 1:30, we have Paul Sutton from C&T, myself working with Jill Adamson, and Vaishali and Vishaka Chakrabarti. We're looking at digital work, online work. Can this be active and engaging and not simply passive? And then at 3:30, we have a workshop online with Cecily O'Neill and with some students from UCL in London. So it's quite a busy day. I realize that I haven't put really any or many breaks in for myself. I haven't put a lunch break in. I'll be here all day, and I hope you will join us for as many sessions as you can. So over to Tim and Iona. Do you want to introduce yourselves?
Hello, my name's Tim Taylor, and I'm sitting currently in Norwich, and I work in different schools across the country developing Dorothy's work, particularly Mantle the Expert.
Hello, I'm Iona, and I've been involved in evaluating a program that Tim and Luke were teaching on, and I work using dramatic inquiry in Dorothy's work wherever I can.
So we're looking at an exciting project that you did in schools in Shropshire, I think, funded by the Paul Hamlyn Foundation, and looking at Mantle the Expert and the impact of Mantle the Expert, because this is something I guess we absolutely need to show what the impact is and what difference it can make. So over to the two of you.
Great. So I'm going to start by sharing my screen. Hopefully everybody will be able to see that. Can you give me a thumbs up if that's seeable? Great. So yes, as David said, the project was funded by the Paul Hamlyn Foundation, Teacher Development Fund, and the idea initially was something that was to build on something that Luke Abbott and myself had worked on with the National NASUWT Union, which was to work out a program to train teachers in the use of Mantle the Expert. And so we'd written a program while we were working on that project for the NASUWT, and I'm going to talk a little bit about what that program involved later on in this presentation. But we took that program and then we worked with 9 schools across the border in Shropshire and Wales. And this is really what we discovered in the facilitation of that program. So I'm going to start by giving Iona the chance to introduce the program and what we're actually going to do during. I'll read this bit, and then Iona's going to introduce what the program involved. So we're going to spend 10 minutes introducing the project, its timescale, location, number of teachers, schools involved, etc. Then I'll give an overview of the structure, the training days, the development days, the triads, the reflections, the reading, etc. Then Iona will then come back and talk about the significant findings. Then I'll come back for another bit and talk about how the training and support worked in practice and how the teachers responded and what were the challenges and solutions. And then we hope to have, it'll probably be a slightly shorter discussion period now, but around about 15 minutes of discussion at the end. So, Iona, over to you.
Right, thank you. Yes, I was invited to evaluate the project with Irwin Hopkins from Swansea University. And we decided we would take a sort of 2-part approach, really. I was very interested in the stories of teachers, and the evaluation really focused on looking at it through the lens of the teacher. What were the teachers' experiences? How did the teachers perceive things were changing for them? I would say that this whole program for me was looking for, it was about change, really, because you're thinking teachers entering a new way of teaching. It's got to be about shifts, lots of shifts in their practice. Having said that, quite a number of the teachers, I looked at 6 teachers in sort of more in depth, tracking their stories and their development, whereas Irwin backed that up with questionnaires relating to key questions, which kind of supported, what was happening in the stories that these 6 teachers are sharing with me. Now, the 2 questions, there were 4 questions, but we haven't got time to go into all of them. But I think the crucial ones, the first one really was, why do teachers believe it is worth learning to use Mantle of the Expert? And the second question was, what changes do the teachers assess have changed or have occurred in their own practice? So those are the key questions we're kind of looking at. Quite a number of the 6 people I was looking at, 5 of them at least, were already very familiar with Mantle of the Expert through what Tim's described with the NUT or whatever it was, the course you did before, with Helen, one of the heads, being quite strong, particularly because she'd followed that course and was very inspired by it. So they did come with that wanting to learn it, which was great. So that's kind of the key things, really. It is about change, and it is about, how you change. And obviously obviously there are challenges, because I think one of the most difficult things really in life is changing yourself and changing what you do. When you perhaps got used to a certain way of working. And I think that's really what it was about. I'll come back to you with more detail perhaps in the next bit. I think that's enough for now. Do you think, Tim?
Yeah, I think maybe talk a little bit about where the project took place.
Oh, sorry. Yes, sorry. It was on the border of the Shropshire, Welsh pool area, wasn't it? And we had 9 schools. 5 of them were the Welsh schools, and 5 Welsh, and then for English, English schools. All the schools actually were taught through the medium of English, but obviously they all got taught, the Welsh schools particularly got taught Welsh as a second language. And of course, they were following the Welsh curriculum, which was a bit more liberating than the English curriculum. So maybe it was, it gave them a chance really to have a go and feel that they were being part of a curriculum that was being supported in their country. And I think that was, I think that's it really.
Yeah, and the time scale. Do you want to talk a little bit
about
the
time scale was like, it started off, I think it was 2019. It was meant to be 3 years, wasn't it, initially? But obviously with COVID coming in, it extended that program. And Tim was very instrumental, as I'm sure he'll tell you about, the online resources he produced, which they took on board and continued with. And what was very interesting as well, because of that situation, because of that, you really had an opportunity to see, well, how sustainable is this? Because if you're looking at something over 5 years virtually, and you're seeing people still sticking with it, still wanting to do it, still carrying it on, developing it, I think the COVID, in a sense, made that possible because it extended communications between trainers and the teachers, and obviously the buddy system, which Tim might mention that, and all the different dimensions to this program. They still continued that in the difficult circumstances of COVID. So I think it actually did demonstrate how it was sustained, and how people didn't really want to go back to the regular way they taught. So and I'll talk a little bit more in the next slot about some of the outcomes, if you like.
Yeah, the other thing that comes to mind, Iona, is perhaps people would like to know a little bit about the range of schools.
Yeah, the range of schools. They were quite a number of them were rural schools, actually, quite small schools. But then you also had Newtown, which was a much bigger school. So there was a range of schools in terms of size. Some were very small village schools, the teaching head, and some were much larger organizations. Just the one mainly, I think, was the Newtown one, was the largest school. And the range of youngsters, you're going from early years, year 1, up to year 6. So you had the whole range of young people involved. And one of the focuses that Paul Hamlyn was really interested in was the disadvantaged, as they call it, disadvantaged children. And they really wanted to know what the impact of it was on them. And my definition of that was like any child who experienced barriers to learning for whatever reason, whether it was a condition like Asperger's, ADHD, anything like that, or whatever the reason that they had a barrier to learning. That's how we interpreted that definition of disadvantaged. So that was one of the things that we looked at. Yeah.
And I don't know if you want to say anything about the teachers that were involved. You've already said that some of them knew about Mantle the expert before, but some of them were entirely new to the approach.
He was entirely new to it, but so I mean, I think one of the big challenges, I suppose, as always, I think, is letting go, really, is in the classroom, to actually be listening to what the children were bringing to it and actually building on their ideas. And that, I think that's always a big challenge. And the feeling of loss of control in the classroom, they are very concerned about that that was a challenge for them. But what's interesting, I think, from our point of view is, because I attended the training days, the developmental days, I was involved in witnessing the teaching with Luke and Tim. What was very interesting to me was that this whole model really reflects Mantle in a sense, because in Mantle of the Expert, you're actually drawing what children already know. You're drawing on what they bring to it. You're building on that. And I think Tim and Luke's approach has very much mirrored that, because you were building on that. And it was really, you were sort of hand in hand with them. And I think I don't know how unique it is, but I think it's pretty unique that you're in the classroom and you're seeing it with your particular children. It's not some abstract idea that you go on a course and learn about, but you see what was happening to your children, while this program is ongoing with your trainers. So I do think that's a key factor, really, because in a way, I suppose Luke and Tim were doing a Mantle with the teachers in a sense, weren't they? It's very much the principles of that that you're listening, that you're taking on board their concerns, that you're sharing it, that you're sharing your own shortcomings, that you're not helping, you're helping them feel less vulnerable, because you can share your stories. I think, Tim and Luke shared their stories and they started what they'd experienced. It was definitely a journey, and it was a shared journey. And I think that was a very, very powerful feature of it all, because they didn't feel so scared. They were, I suppose, allowed to make mistakes. They were allowed to fail, if you like. And as Dorothy always said, there's no such thing as failure, only learning. And I think with that sort of, that sort of atmosphere, the teachers grew, and the children grew. And that's what I was witnessing really there.
Thank you. So this is this is a description of the project and how we structured it. So as I say, Luke and I had already worked together on a project that was funded by the NASUWT, the union, teachers union in the UK, working with a number of teachers over a couple of years. And we had sort of designed a program that had 4 components to it. The first was that there were weekend training courses. So the teachers came along for a weekend and were trained over that in a fairly intensive way in the fundamentals of Mantle the Expert and drama inquiry. The next element, or the next component of the 4 was what we call development days. And the idea of that was that the teachers would see us, as Iona said, working with their children in their classes and would observe what was happening in those sessions. The third component was research. So the idea was that the teachers would themselves be researching the approach, reading materials, reading the guide, and other stuff, looking at things online. And the 4th component was we asked them to keep a reflective journal, which they would keep throughout the project in order to think about their development and how it was changing over time. So we took that original project program, and we after testing it with the NASUWT teachers, we refined it in small ways, but fundamentally it remained the same, and used that as a structure for the program that we were going to do for the Mortar project, for the project with the Paul Hamlyn Foundation schools. There were slight changes. One was that we didn't need to do weekend. There was enough money within the project that we could release the teachers to spend 2 days in school time. So that made quite a big difference to the teachers themselves, obviously not having to give up their weekends, but also to the schools who had to find or relieve the teachers while they're out of school. So there was more of an onus on the schools in that regard. And the other thing that we refined that was part of the original NASUWT project, but became much more refined under the Paul Hamlyn Foundation, was the idea of triads. So what we wanted to do with the triads was to create sort of small subgroups within the larger group. So there was the project teachers, and then within the project teachers, what we did was assign them into groups of 3, which we called triads. And then what the triads would do is to visit each other's schools. So if you imagine we're visiting at a school for a development day, one school in the triad, and the teachers from the other 2 come and watch that development day together. So when we're teaching, we're not just teaching in front of one teacher, we're teaching in front of three. And then the idea is that those teachers then have the opportunity to talk to each other, which a lot of them did during the project through various means, either face-to-face, but mostly through WhatsApp and email, and discuss what they'd seen and reflect on that. And then, so that was and then just to step back slightly, the project was organised into rounds. So we had, I think, originally 5 rounds. So five training days, 5 development days, 5 reflection situations. So on the second set so we worked in each of the 3 schools with Luke and I doing the teaching. And then on the 4th round, the teachers would then teach themselves. They would run the lesson in a kind of team teaching situation where they would run the lesson themselves, plan it and teach it. And Luke and I would stand back and observe. And then in the 5th round, we actually visited the school individual teachers who would work with their own classes. And that was more of a kind of personal kind of feedback situation. And one of the main reasons why we structured the program in that way was through experience of working with teachers over a number of years and reflecting on what had worked and what hadn't worked. One of the things that we found, and I'm sure all of you have had common experiences, anybody who's tried to train teachers in this approach, is that you often get an initial burst of enthusiasm. So people get very excited about it and they enjoy, the day or the weekend or whatever, or the workshop, go back enthused. And then that, because of a number of reasons, that enthusiasm dissipates. And if you go back and talk to people later on, they say, oh yeah, no, I enjoyed that. I like that a lot. I'm not really using it anymore. And that was true really of quite a lot of the training that we've done subsequently, is that we had a lot of people who weren't using it after a number of, after a while. Maybe have picked up some of the ideas and used some of those things, but weren't actually using the approach in a kind of a systematic way. So we realized that we needed to do more than just the odd training day. There actually had to be a program, and that was what this project was about, really, is to see what that program would look like and how it would operate in practice. Was it something that could be done practically, and would it make a difference if we did it in that way? Which is whether it did or not is the subject of my next piece that I'll be doing in a little while after Iona's talked next. So I'll hand back to you, Iona.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Tim. Yeah, well, I think, what you've said there, Tim, is just so interesting, really. It is in reflecting again the approach that we take with teachers, very much like the approach we take with young people, because in that sense, they're working as a team, they're working collaboratively, they're sharing stuff, and it really was a great, feature of the whole training. And what we found as a result of this, I think that especially amongst the 6 narratives I was following, is, the big thing I think that teachers were learning and actually trying out was to listen to the children and to bring their ideas into it. They were really, and I think that's such a challenge, because the whole idea, the traditional view of the teacher, I suppose, is we check what they know and then that's fine. But it was like really listening to what they were interested in. And I will just quote from one teacher, actually, who says here from one of the schools, generally they were paying more attention to what children brought to the work, attempted to include their contributions. And they were doing something on Ernest Shackleton, actually. And she said, whereas before I would disregard a child's answer, I'm now incorporating it into the story. For example, in our Mantle about Ernest Shackleton, asking for skills to join the team, child said, well, she would be good at singing and dancing, and that might be something he could learn. Now, that sounds like, oh, that's not very appropriate, maybe in a response you'd normally get. And previously, she said, I would have dismissed this answer because it didn't fit in with my narrative. However, this time I said, you can entertain the crew and keep their spirits up. I could see from her reaction that she felt valued and happy that her contribution mattered to the story. And later she found out later that actually he did have something like that happened in his work, that people did entertain him. They played music and they did do things to entertain the crew. So it was kind of quite authentic as well. So that was a nice, and there were stories like this which were quite common. And as well as the teacher's stories, we obviously tapped into, because the children, in a way, I suppose, their responses and what they said about the program really supported, I think, how the teachers had to really pay attention to what children brought to the learning, that they were able to share power, and they were able to, afford them agency, allow them choices. And there was one story, and just to give you a few quotes from the children, really, to get a feel for the whole thing. The one child was working on the Fire of London, I think. He said, I've heard this story before, as a year 6 student, but I've never got behind it before, what people actually feel like. I was more intrigued about what the people of London felt like. I was acting as Thomas the baker accidentally started the fire. The baker was blamed. I quite liked being Thomas, being blamed. People always think they're right. Was it an accident? And the fact that they feel as well, when you think about the different worlds we open up in drama, there was another quote, if I can find it here, sorry. I think it was where he said, that's right. There was a child who said, I like thinking on the spot. It's more exciting. And we can go to different places at different times. I loved it when we created a map around the story of the Mountain King. And I love going to different places at different times. So I think what teachers are finding and what the children are finding, that you're opening up a new world for children when you use this approach. And also what I found was the teachers found a great joy in teaching. It wasn't predictable because they were relying on this dialogue with children. It was that created possibilities of where the drama might go. And one teacher said, I can see that they become obsessed and it becomes part of what we do in the classroom. At the moment, the classroom itself has become a research base in the Antarctic. So the whole environment's changing. And there was an excitement. And as Tim says, I know initially we always have this feeling of excitement when we start doing training and we've done a one-off day and it's great. But they were still pretty excited after several years of doing this. They still got excited about new mantles they created. So I think, that's really important. And the questionnaires back this up. I think one of the things we discovered as well, the key thing, I think, is that the senior teachers, because there were 3 heads involved as well, and one was a teaching head, and Helen, the head of Morda, who was coordinating it, was very passionate about it. So I think they obviously felt, and that was an English school, not a Welsh school, so less liberated in terms of the curriculum. But I think because of her passion, that carried it. There was a family feel to the place. It was like a family culture. So they got excited. So I think that's a significant finding, is that the heads, have a big role to play here as well. So I think in terms of change, I think, and they're still doing it now, especially in Morda, as Tim will confirm. I think the change is, I think Dorothy gave us a wonderful quote, if I could only find it, about the change, that we change in minute particulars, moment to moment. There are changes, and change happens over time, as they invest and as they learn more about what they possibly can do as a teacher. And I think it's a very liberating feeling, an exciting feeling, for the teachers involved, and they obviously, there are challenges, and I think in schools where you don't necessarily have that backing, if you like, from the head, it's difficult, because there was one teacher, very, very interesting, very competent teacher, very into the Mantle and doing really well, who was in a school where the head had recently taken over the school and really wanted to put the program on hold because, he had enough to deal with, which I can understand. He had priorities. But that one teacher was so into it. She was insisting she was going to continue it. And she did continue it, and, and did really well with it. She didn't want to let go of it. So it kind of, for me, I think having senior teacher backing is great. If it's not there, it's like an individual, as Dorothy used to say, as an individual, you can make a difference. And she was certainly making a difference to her teaching and the experiences of the children in her class. And I think that's kind of, I hope that sort of, you can read the report and you'll find all these sort of nuances and things I can't go into now, but it was a definite change and a shift in what was happening there. And I think the period of time, along with the nature of the training, had a big impact, actually. One teacher, he said he had this metaphor of like learning to drive, really. And he said something like, it's all right being given the keys to a Ferrari. He said, but it's another thing sitting next to the driver, which he meant, obviously, one of the trainers, Luke or Tim, whichever, that they were demonstrating, but they were alongside him. They gave him the keys. And quite interestingly, I think that's one of the title of your books, isn't it? About unlocking the keys, but giving him the keys, but actually sitting alongside him, driving the Ferrari. I thought it was a wonderful quote. So I think I hope that's given you enough information on the outcome. What do you think, Tim? Is there anything more I should add? I know I've dwelled on the stories because that's the bit I was interested in, and following more deeply 5 or 6 people and their stories, because I feel with research, I was very interested in narrative inquiry, so I was adapting that, because I think through stories that they tell, we find out so much about the shifts that happen, and to have that depth was very important. I didn't just want it to be about a sort of quantitative questionnaire thing. The questionnaires were just confirmed, really, lots of the threads that came out of the stories.
Yeah, I wonder if people might be interested to hear about the impact of COVID. So that happened about, I think, a year or 2 years. You might have to remind me. Into the project.
Yeah.
Did you want to say just a little bit more about that?
Well, I suppose the impact of COVID for them, as all of us, we all felt a little bit disconnected from people, and being on screen isn't quite the same as everything else. And I suppose it was no different for them. But then we picked up, didn't we? We picked up. And I think that thread was still going on. As I said, we still communicating with trainers, still having buddy conversations, and they worked well in certain cases, the buddy situation. In one particular case, they had a very firm relationship and had learned so much from each other. In other situations, because of the busyness of teachers' lives, they didn't take off as much, I think it's true to say. But I think as well, after COVID, I think, like all of us, we just want to get back in and be doing stuff. But I think the work that you did online and having the roles and the different stuff that you could do the best you could at a distance was a way of not losing that thread, really. I don't think they ever lost that thread of, of the investment they'd already made prior to COVID.
Yeah, I think it damaged the impetus of it, the sort of momentum that was gathered in that first year or two, and we tried as everybody else did to muck along really, and we did try doing things online, and we did create. It gave us a window actually to create materials, support materials that otherwise probably wouldn't have been written. So that was a kind of a good outcome for it. I think for the teachers, it because of the disruption that COVID caused, and particularly, as everybody will remember, in that first lockdown, when teachers were asked to teach online, Mantle the Expert and the project became very much a secondary concern for them. I think some of them tried to keep things going. And we did actually write some materials, some teaching materials, one in particular called Troll Hunters.
That's right.
An online mantle that people could use, and some of the teachers trialed that, and another one called Castle. But then between the first and the second lockdown, we tried to we actually had a training day or 2 days. But then somebody tested positive, and it was all that. Everybody remembers the chaos that caused. So the development days that were in the diary for us to go and do the next week had to be cancelled, and it was like that. So I think in the first year, again, I can't remember exactly. I'd have to go back to my diary and kind of recall this. But for the first year or 18 months, the project ran very smoothly. And all of the teachers at that point seemed very, very engaged in this. And we got buy-in from the head teachers at the initial conference. We did a kind of an event right at the beginning of the project, where we'd invited all the heads and the project teachers and other people who were interested to come along, and that was very well attended. And the head teachers that signed up for the project were very excited and supportive of the teachers. But I think COVID really messed that up, particularly at the head teachers level. So there were, after we sort of reevaluated and kind of picked ourselves up after COVID and said, well, where are we with this? What sort of state is the project in? And it was clear that there was still a number of schools that were still committed to this. And I think you're absolutely right, Iona. Within that, there were some teachers who were absolutely committed. So I'm sort of recognising as you're talking the people. I mean, I'm thinking, I'm not going to mention anybody's names.
No, but
But there were teachers who had kept going right the way through COVID and didn't lose the obsession.
In fact, there was one time when the one teacher that we're referring to was single one in her school who was doing it. I remember her doing something about growth and plants and things, and using her garden, and almost being enrolled sometimes, and going to areas in her background. And in a sense, there was a kind of intimacy about that. It was a kind of, this is my home, but I'm using my home to teach you. It was a lovely feel about that. And there was also an occasion, I think, online when parents were trying stuff out with the online troll thing. They were doing stuff as well. So there was, it was that feeling of something's happened beyond our control, but despite that, we're still there for you, and we're still trying to make this work. So I think those efforts were not something that people ignored, and I think there was very great strength between parents and teachers because of it. When they came back. I mean, it was a crisis. We had no control over it, but given that, it was a real test, I think, of their commitment, that they came back to it. They came back, and were ready to go. Yeah, it was just one of those hiccups, but
Yeah, I think we have to be, you know, honest with ourselves
mm,
that we did lose some teachers during that
yes,
time.
we did,
And actually, what happened was that we numbers maintained all the way through.
yeah,
So we
yeah,
still had the same number of teachers at the end as we did at the beginning.
yes,
But,
yes,
but some of the places of those that dropped out of the project were replaced by people who were enthusiastic to join and had kind of gone, I'd
yes,
like to be part of that project. So
yes,
even though they were kind of coming in and, you know, after the first year or so,
yeah,
that we still had numbers of people who were
we did.
maintained.
And there was
But
lots, yeah, there was lots of good reasons why people left. Some people did move to different jobs. And I
right,
know when I started with 6, I ended up with 5 because another thing to think about with that person didn't stay with the program, that particular person. Um, and I think what it is, it's kind of like when you're entering into this work, I think you have to say, like Dorothy used to say, I think I want to give it a try. You
yeah,
know, I haven't got a clue, but I'll give it a go. But I think his attitude was, I'm not sure about this. I don't think this is, I don't even want to bother. So you've got to have the frame of mind in the sense of saying, I want to give this a go. I want to give it a chance. But sometimes you've got to have an open mind, really, I think, for any learning to take place. But that particular individual was very much, well, what I'm doing is fine. Why break it? Why fix it if it's not broken or whatever the phrase is? Why should I change anything? What I'm doing is fine. It's fine. So it's that sort of thing, I think, that would prevent people from developing and growing as well.
yeah. So I think it's a complex matter, and
It is. Yeah,
I'm
it
sure
is.
all of us have reflected at different times on
Yeah,
why it appeals to some people a lot more
yes,
than others. And I
yes.
think I think you're right with that. I think that for some people, it's it's not their approach. That's not the way that they
Mm,
want to teach. Whereas for others, it's like, oh, this is amazing. This is
yes,
incredible.
yeah,
I
yes,
wish I'd known this earlier. And then they just put all of their energy into it. So I think there's that's one factor. That's an important factor. And I think those people who realised quite early on. I think there were a couple of people who dropped out
yeah.
really very early on and were replaced very quickly. Were
Mm,
people like that.
mm,
Then there was the stresses and things that happened with COVID that didn't help.
yeah,
But then there were the normal kind of things that happen in schools. Changes of head teachers.
yes, of
One
course.
of one of the most important factors in the success or otherwise of teachers using and continuing to use the approach was whether they felt that they had the full support of their head teachers,
Very important.
and mostly they did,
Mm,
but there were a couple.
mm,
Either I think in one school the head teacher changed and the new head teacher came in and had different priorities,
mm,
and in another school the head teacher had initially liked the project. There was a
mm,
big school, I mean a three form entry, huge school,
yeah.
and had initially liked the project,
Mm,
but didn't see it as something that was going to happen across the school. So
mm,
kind of didn't really give the teacher the support that she
yes,
she wanted.
yes, yes. I think initially, for some teachers, even the teachers whose stories I followed, there was a degree of anxiety
Yeah,
about the curriculum, like linked to their responsibility. I wanted to get it right for the children.
yeah,
I wanting to be doing it well so the children get the most out of it. That was a bit of a degree of anxiety. But I think what changed things for them is really the impact it was having on the children when they
yeah,
could witness the learning that was happening. They knew it was doing well. They were getting it right as far as anybody gets anything right. But I just think the huge feedback for the teachers was what the children were doing and
yeah,
what was happening in the classroom.
yeah.
I think that's a huge feature of it, as far as I could see from the report, anyway. Mm.
Yeah, I think those teachers that got to the stage to the end and are in the report, those teachers are testament really to how
Yeah,
successful it was. I
yeah,
think if you read the report and you listen to those comments, and particularly as you say the responses that the students had to the work and the changes that they noticed in their classrooms, that says, well, if you can, this program works, but bearing in mind all the things that happened along the way and all the various challenges that happen in schools as routine, those teachers that went through the program and got to the point where they were using Mantle the Expert successfully in their classrooms, it made a big difference. And just to say one last thing before we open it up to discussion, the school at the centre of this, Morda, had started off in, I mean, I don't know how much people know about Ofsted and the sort of the regime of Ofsted, but the Ofsted is an inspection service in England, and the school Morda had been a school that had been deemed as requires improvement, which means that they're under a lot of scrutiny. And at the start of the project, they were a school that required improvement. And very, very bravely, the head teacher at Morda introduced this Mantle the Expert approach into the school. And by the end of it, all of her teachers were using it across the school. And Ofsted came in, and this was a little over a year ago now, and they deemed the school as good. And one of the things that they were very impressed with was the way that the children were talking about their learning and the curriculum. They noted it in the report as a special feature of the school, how enthusiastic the children were and how knowledgeable they were about what they were learning. And so that I mean, not that we should overstate Ofsted and Ofsted's judgment, but that was an independent group of people who wouldn't come in with necessarily a positive view of this work, and thought that it was working really, really well, as enough to say that the school would no longer required improvement and actually was now good, and were prepared to put it in the report. So I think that's worth noting how successful that was, and that Helen had started off with her and another teacher at the school, but has now got all of the teachers in the school using Mantle the Expert. So it's kind of broken out of the program and is now now expanded into the whole school. So that's enough of you and I talking on it without giving other people the chance to ask questions. So if we move on to the discussion. Now these, I'm just putting up a list of the sorts of things that you might like to talk about, but please don't feel obliged to stick to that list. We just wanted to give you the chance really to ask questions if you have any about the project and how it was run.
Thanks, Tim. Thanks, Iona. Really interesting. And it's a case of, well, Sukesh, who's coming on next to talk about the research he's been doing. The other day he asked me, well, why isn't Dorothy's work happening? I mean, it is happening, but why isn't it happening more? Why isn't it happening in schools everywhere? And I think it's some of the issues that you're talking about really are behind this. It's the question of the position of senior management. It's the challenge of change, I suppose. And the challenge, you're right, about making sustained change so it lasts, so teachers are continuing to use it. And we have the model of schools like Woodrow School, where it's used throughout the school, where it's been used for years, and it is sustained. So how can we make it happen? How can we make Dorothy's work? And this is one model where you've got this sustained input, and it'd be great to go back in a couple of years and see how it's developing and how it's going on. But can we open it up now to questions, to comments from people? And whether you have any similar experiences yourself.
Well, I'll just talk a little bit while people have the opportunity to maybe have a think of questions that they might like to ask about what you've just said, David. I think one of the things that we learned through the time that we worked on the project and the project that preceded it with the NASUWT was what kinds of training and support people needed. So before, I think it was not haphazard. I don't want to be, too kind of critical of how we worked previously, but we hadn't really thought of a program. We hadn't thought of the components that made up the program and how those things link together. And one of the things that we hadn't really done systematically was to think about the importance of people making networks and the way that people were making networks. And I know this because I'm still in touch with many of these people, that if we go back to the original NASUWT project, which preceded this, which is now 7 years old, there are still many of those people who are part of that project who are still in regular contact with each other. Now, they might not necessarily be using Mantle the Expert in a systematic way like they do at Woodrow. It maybe isn't built into the school, and they're not using it across the curriculum in the way that maybe Dorothy envisaged. But they are still using many of the techniques and the strategies that they picked up on the way, and are still talking to each other and sharing ideas.
Chris.
Yeah, thanks very much. Very interesting description. I was wondering, to do with the curriculum, how many different areas of knowledge you were able to integrate into the curriculum.
That very much depended on the schools and the teachers. So as Iona said, more than half the schools were in Wales. So Wales has got an integrated curriculum. So in Wales, they were very keen, and I mean, the drive is towards cross-curricular learning. So in Wales, they were very keen to create mantles that were teaching in a cross-curricular way. That was less so in the UK, where the curriculum is more compartmentalised. In some schools like Morda, they were very interested in teaching cross-curricular and were keen on that. But in some schools, we were very much asked to, or they were planning mantles that were particularly based either on a history or a geography topic, or basically humanities with some maybe elements of writing and English.
Thanks, Anton.
I hope you can hear me. I'm a student from Germany, and I was just wondering, because here in Germany, what I realized with my other students, that they're quite scared to touch it, and that they're like, oh, this seems so overwhelming to do. And I think when you think about sustaining a project, I was just wondering if that's a big issue that you were coming apart, that teachers were like, oh, it seems too overwhelming to do alone, or maybe with a new class that I didn't do it before with, and then they don't do it again.
I think.
Yeah. Sorry.
I was just remembering something that Dorothy Heathcote said actually to us. That people can feel that bit of overwhelming. I'm not going to run this for an hour. It's going to be chaotic. They're going to be running everywhere, and I won't know what to do, and I won't be able to control them. So she said, I remember her saying, why don't you try it 5 minutes before the bell for break or lunch? Why don't you make a start and keep it small and invite somebody in and test the waters? I'm wondering if we could run something. Have you ever run anything very major? What sort of things do you think you'd do, that really big jobs that you do? Have that feeling going. And I wondered if we could testing the water, bit by bit, step by step. Just think of one project you might do, or one particular subject you're focusing on, one story, and it'll grow. Because that's what I found in my experiences. You make a small start, and the children run with it, and they won't want to let it go, and it takes over, So rather than think ahead, I've got to do this huge thing, I've got to make it sustainable, I've got to do... No, even if you're on your own in the classroom, just test it out. Talk to colleagues about it. Say what you're trying. Try and team up with people who are interested. That's what I would say.
Yeah,
Does that make sense?
and I agree with that. And hello, Anton, by the way. Hello, we've been corresponding. Um, one of the things that we were very keen on in terms of the design of the project was to start by giving teachers, saying start small, do an hour once a week, and then build on it, but don't stop doing it. So we were saying, even if you only find an hour a week, do that and make that commitment. So that was part of the commitment that the teachers made initially, was that if they were going to be part of the project, they had to say that they would teach at least for 1 hour a week using the approach. And then what we then did as we were running through the program, because obviously we were revisiting, coming back, and the training was building and they were having more experience of it. Then we were encouraging them to build, longer projects and expand out, and if they could, to start teaching across the curriculum. So we very much tried to do it as a kind of a curve as it went up, rather than, as you say, saying, well, look, it's either all or nothing, because that's hopeless. You absolutely can't do that. It's far too much to take on one go. There's David, there's somebody who's Michael who's written in the chat. Did you want to read that question?
Yeah. Well, thanks by the way, Anton. And I don't think Mantle is happening in Germany as yet, but you can be a pioneer in making it happen there.
No, not really, but it is getting studied in my university, so it is getting a little bit of a role.
That's great. That's great to hear. So Michael has said, can you give a quick overview of the training that teachers undertook the program? And also, were these all drama teachers or were other subjects involved in the training? I imagine it was primary school teachers and they weren't drama teachers.
Right. So we haven't actually made that clear, did we? No, this is all in primary. And no, they weren't drama teachers. They were classroom teachers. And I think apart from Helen, none of them had any drama experience previous to the project, other than being interested in drama and maybe having attended drama courses at other times. But they weren't specialists. Shall I answer the question about the overview of the training, or did you want to answer that, Ian?
No, I think that that's fine. You do that, Tim. I think, yeah.
So in terms of the training days, those were largely led by Luke Abbott, and I supported him on those training days, and it was essentially if you started off with an introduction to Mantle the Expert, where did Mantle the Expert come from? What are the fundamental elements of Mantle the Expert? And then large parts of it were to do with drama conventions and strategies, how to work teacher in and out of role, how to bring the students into the fiction, how to develop the fiction through the use of drama, because this was the thing that teachers didn't have much experience of. So the opportunity for them to learn about those techniques on the training days was the opportunities that people really welcomed. Obviously, around that, there were lots of discussions around the role of inquiry and collaboration and all the other elements and aspects of the approach that make it work, and lots of discussion and reflection. On the development days, as I say, in the early development days, Luke or I would go in, plan a lesson with the triad teachers, teach that lesson in front of the teachers with the class, and then there would be an opportunity after the lesson to spend an hour or two reflecting on that lesson, because it would be an hour or an hour and a half in class, but we would then we wanted to spend a lot of time reflecting on the experience of what they'd seen in the classroom, rather than kind of dropping in, teaching a lesson, and then leaving after 5 minutes. That discussion, reflection, looking at how that fitted in with the training that they'd done, was crucial to building up people's understanding of the approach. So it was that kind of program, really. I can't imagine kind of the sandwich program.
Can I add on to something as well, Tim? Because in the development days, the teachers were participants, just like the children are participants when we're in the school. And one of the unique things I think of this training is that I got this gut feeling that teachers are often told what works with children, or they might be demonstrated to them. But when they're actually in the context themselves and they're running something in a Mantle of the Expert, they're getting that experience of what it feels like for the child who's getting that experience. That's what I think is a crucial thing. It's not just being told and demonstrated, they're in it. They begin to invest. They can't let it go when they're a participant. And to get that understanding, I think that's a crucial thing, actually, that made some of this work so well, is because they knew what it felt like to invest in something you're running yourself.
And that, of course, is Dorothy's method.
Of course. Yeah, absolutely.
Experience it. You need to experience it.
You need to experience it yourself.
Yeah.
Because why else would you bother?
Right.
If you didn't get that feeling of, I get this. And that's what they got, I think.
David, have we got a chance to answer Elaine's question?
Yeah, so Elaine has asked what are the reasons Woodrow School has been able to take it up so fully. And I think you can really say it's about the senior management. It's about Richard Kieran and Lisa Hinton and how they came in with it. Well, Richard came in with it and really, he's the one who's been mainly responsible for making that happen in the school. And then all the teachers have taken it on and love carrying on with it every year, year after year. And senior management can be key there because, I once did some work in a school where it was all going great. It was all wonderful. Teachers were really taking it on and excited by it. And then a new head teacher came in and said, no, we're not doing Mantle anymore. And that was it. Doors were closed. And everything just went. Everything was just lost. So the senior management is key, I think.
The other thing that is crucial that Richard did, and we should acknowledge this as a precursor to the project that Luke and I compiled for the NASUWT, was that Richard knew he'd actually worked in a school previous to working at Woodrow. He knew that there needed to be ongoing and sustained training and support. And so over a number of years, he understood the scope of the project that he was taking on. If he wanted to introduce Mantle the Expert across the whole school and sustain it, that it wasn't enough just to do a couple of training days. You needed to train the whole staff, and you needed to keep that going. And even now, and I don't know how long he's been at the school. It must be 10 years.
Yes, it must be 10 years. And previous to that, he was at Quinlan Holt. Through that time, I was a governor at his previous school and this school. So I witnessed a lot of these developments. And I'd say one of the things is what I said previously about they invested in what the experience was like for them. And as you say, he knew it would be long term. So they bought into it because they were invited into the training and having that investment and realizing what it did for you when you were part of that. And I think they were just, convinced by it because of that. Yeah.
And sorry, Elaine.
Sorry. Do you think that also helped that you had that personal connection with him? So he knew and trusted you as well, I suppose.
Me?
You said that you were a governor.
Yeah, I was a governor there. Oh, I'm not. To be honest, he got into Mantle before I became a governor, really, there.
Oh, okay.
Because he had contact with Luke and that sort of thing. And I think it was Luke who said, oh, you should have Iona as a governor. And this happens to me all through my life. People recommend me to do things. I end up doing things I even thought of doing. And sometimes I don't always want to. But I was brought in then. And hopefully I've contributed to it, but I don't think it was anything to do with that as such. But it was nice how it grew, and then you networked again with more people, and I think it's the investment Richard realised has to be made, because change does not happen slowly, and it doesn't happen overnight, and it needs that supported team, working with you. In the way that Tim and Luke worked with them. I think that was essential, really. Yeah.
So we should wrap up there. change is a key thing because it's about teachers making a shift and schools making a shift because it's such a different way of working and a different way of thinking about teaching and learning. And so it is a big step. It is a big thing to take on. Claire says, where can we get the full report?
Well, what I'll do is I'll send it to you now, David, and you can put it up on your website, can't you? And link it to this. That would be best, don't you think?
Okay, I'll do that. So thank you very much, Iona. Thank you, Tim, for starting us off. Such a fascinating project and such a great achievement, really. And as I say, next at past, we've got Sukesh and Isha talking about the research they've done precisely in this question of change and where teachers are and how they can shift in their own work. But it does start with them wanting to make that shift.